Here's 25 through 11, guys. We'll start at 25 and just kind of talk through some of this. We just mentioned Texas A&M. Obviously lost to Texas A&M lost to Auburn this weekend. They did lose to South Carolina, but not this weekend. They lost to Auburn in 4 or 5 overtimes. I kind of lost track. Yeah. It doesn't even seem like normal overtime anymore because of the 2-point thing. Like, that's not like a whole period of overtime. That's not the same thing. So anyway, it was 4 or 5 overtimes, crazy ending. I know you've all seen it by this point. And Auburn is able to come out on top. Not many balls have bounced Auburn's way, but that one did, and it knocked A&M off their perch. But there is some silver lining for Texas A&M as they've only got 2 losses in the SEC conference, and so they still control their own destiny this weekend, Mason. They're one of 2 other teams, or one of 2 teams in the SEC that have a chance to go to the SEC championship still, and that's them in Texas. That's going to be a huge matchup. We're going to talk about that one Tuesday, 7:30 Eastern here on the live show. Kansas State, they've got a big game coming up this week. They're going to be facing off and going on the road to Iowa State. So literally Kansas State, I think they need some dominoes to fall, them and Colorado, who's ranked there at 23. Some crazy stuff's got to happen for them to be able to make it to the Big 12 championship game just because of who they've lost to, things like that. So these are teams that technically are tied for first or right around, first or second in the Big 12, but there's a lot of technicalities there, and it would take a lot for those teams to make it to the Big 12 championship. So although we are going to talk about some of their games this week because who's to say some crazy dominoes don't fall? And we'll, like I said, try to do our best to make any sense of it. We got UNLV, Memphis, and Tulane there at 22, 21, and 20. Each of those teams has got a couple of losses this year. Tulane is about to face off against Army in their conference championship game, the AAC championship. And from what I saw from Army yesterday, I think that Tulane is probably going to be able to take care of them. Tulane, pretty good football team, and if you really look back at it, they've been they've been pretty good for the last couple of years, right? Gave Ole Miss a run for their money last year, won a bunch of ball games. They're a good squad, but no chance of making the college football playoff there. Any of those 3 teams, that's about as high as they're going to get for the year, and they've worked their way up and earned that spot. So congratulations to those teams. BYU at 19, they lose 2 weeks in a row. I called it 2 weeks in a row. I bet money on it 2 weeks in a row, and I won money on it 2 weeks in a row. It was predictable. BYU has played with fire all year, and they got burned twice now. And look, it wasn't terrible. Well, you could argue that Kansas has been pretty terrible, but if you're actually paying attention to what's going on, which I don't blame anybody for not watching Kansas over the last few weeks, guys. I don't blame you. But Kansas has been on a roll. They lost to Kansas State by a couple of points. That game could have really went either way. And other than that, they've just pretty much just went on and beat 3 ranked opponents out of the last 4 games. So Kansas has got something to them, and they were in our preseason top 25. They're one of those teams that has just kind of, grown into their shoes, if you will, as the season has went on. So watch out. Anybody that's got to play Kansas, I'm trying to think of who they play this week. They got somebody else this week, and I feel like it was one of the contenders. But
Baylor.
Oh, okay, that's not a contender, so scratch that. It was a nice comeback for Kansas. I think they're going for bowl eligibility this weekend.
I mean, technically, Baylor's tied for 4th in the conference or 5th.
Baylor's been better than what I thought they would be as well, honestly. But so Kansas is trying to get bowl eligible this weekend, right?
Yes. Yep.
Big game for Kansas, and they're hot. I'm telling you, they'll probably smoke their ass. That'll be a high-scoring game, more than likely.
Yeah.
Illinois at 18. We're not going to waste any time there. Ole Miss at 17. It was a funeral ceremony for Ole Miss and Alabama today. Literally, there was some people paying eulogy on YouTube today, and it was pretty funny. It's just you're out of reach at this point, right? Mason, is there any possible? I don't see any possible way Alabama or Ole Miss, no matter what happens at this point, moves their way back up towards that top 12. So
never say never, man. Never say never.
I just don't see. I mean, I know never say never, and the scenarios are crazy, but I can't even think of a scenario so damn crazy that they could make their way back up there.
Well, and I couldn't think of a scenario so crazy that Georgia would end up in the SEC championship game, and it happened within a day. So right now, the AP has Alabama. The AP that came out today has Alabama at 13, right outside of the top 12. So I'm not ready to say, and they're behind Clemson, who's probably going to lose to South Carolina. You got Miami and SMU in front of them. If I mean, those teams are going to play each other in the ACC championship, more than likely. I think that they should both get into the playoffs, but there's a chance that the committee drops them out and Alabama gets a chance to sneak in there.
That would just be a terrible, terrible mistake. And I but the fact that they're at 13, here they are. They had every chance in the in a while. I'm sorry. Did I go out there for a second?
Yeah, you cut out. You said they had every chance.
But Alabama, they had their chance to drop them out of this whole situation and this whole scenario here. There was your scapegoat. And if something crazy happened and all the dominoes fell, you could always move them back up after, possibly beating Auburn this weekend, I guess. This is crazy. The AP having Alabama at 13, that's insane. And with the losses, they just lost to a team that was 1-6 in the SEC this year, and didn't score a touchdown, right? So and they lost to Vanderbilt, who's lost, 5 games in the SEC? I know it's a great story with Vandy, but damn, it's still Vanderbilt. It's not like I don't know. It's pretty peculiar. I thought that I was in fear that I wasn't going to drop Alabama far enough on here, to be honest with you, Mason. That was, and really their saving grace in our ranking here was the fact that so many other teams had lost and paved the way. That was really their saving grace. Otherwise, this team would have been around 20th or, 20th to 20th, 25, something like that. That's just absolutely insane to me.
Alabama in a normal season in in the SEC where you've got a lot of 10-2 and 11-1 teams that are kind of knocking on the door, Alabama probably wouldn't even be in the top 25 with this schedule, with the losses that they have to Oklahoma and Vanderbilt, even with the win over Georgia
and Tennessee.
And a loss at
which Tennessee's a good squad. They back their way into the playoffs this weekend. We'll kind of talk about that. They can Tennessee can go ahead and thank Alabama and Ole Miss, for taking that L or thank their opponents, however you want to look at that. We've got Alabama at 16. We've got Ole Miss at 17. I feel pretty good about them being in that spot right there. Those two teams, how can you say that they deserve to make it to the playoffs? Even in a scenario where Georgia plays Texas or Texas A&M and loses, you're going to penalize Georgia for losing in a championship game, while those two teams sat at home, and meanwhile they had the same amount of losses, and Georgia lost. Georgia's losses were obviously better. Georgia didn't lose to a Kentucky. Georgia didn't lose to an Oklahoma this year. So it'll be interesting to see how that's treated. South Carolina at 15. South Carolina's a really, really good football team this year. Their offense just keeps on growing and growing and growing. Scored over 50 points this week. I know it's Wofford. It's the Terriers, right? The ferocious Terriers. But it's still the point of the thing. South Carolina has turned a page this year, and I don't know if they can keep the magic going next year. We'll see. But they've got some serious momentum. And you talk about some crazy things happening, it makes more sense to me for South Carolina to figure out a way obviously they need tons of dominoes to fall. I get that. I'm not saying South Carolina deserves to be in the 12-team playoff right now. But if they go and they beat Clemson, they deserve credit for that. They do. And their losses are not to teams that are just, ass, right? They've got some respectable losses. You could, I know a lot of people would say that South Carolina should have never lost the LSU game this year. I mean, they really should have never lost it.
And the Alabama game. I mean,
Alabama game. There was multiple situations in which you could have and should have won that game. That had a little bit to do with some turnovers and stuff, but still, you get the point.
I think if, and I saw where ESPN had South Carolina at they have a 20% chance or somewhere around 20% chance to make the playoffs. I think if they beat Clemson, the number 12 team in the country right now, this weekend, and they beat them decidedly by 2 or 3 scores, I think that they should go in over whoever loses the ACC championship game presumably between SMU and Miami. I don't think that those schedules and records would match up. And then you've also got the eye test of South Carolina and what they've been doing as of late. I would have South Carolina above them. I think South Carolina in the playoffs is a pretty scary team that could go on a really good run here.
Well, they got the defense to do it. And if they would obviously be a team that would have to go on the road or, in the first round. If you're going to go on the road in the first round, you got to have a hell of a defense on you. And South Carolina's got that. The old saying, defense travels. When you go on the road, having a really good defense, that's a dagger in your pocket, man. That's tools in your tool belt for sure. Iowa State at 14. As I said, Kansas State going to be going on the road to Iowa State. And that Iowa State's schedule, we've said from the very beginning, is backloaded. So we're just starting to really kind of learn things about Iowa State. Unfortunately, I don't love this team, but they are atop, the Big 12, and they've done what they needed to do. It's not their fault that, their opponents have, just been kind of weak in the first part of the season. They have collected a couple of losses, as has everyone in the Big 12 at this point. So we'll see what Iowa State's made of this weekend. As I said, they're going to be hosting Kansas State. I think that'll be a nice test. Both teams have a lot on the line, and I think you'll see both teams show up ready to go this weekend. Arizona State, who do they got this weekend?
Arizona.
They got at Arizona, so that should be no problem for Arizona State. As long as one of the best party schools in all of the country, that is Arizona State, by the way, as long as they don't party too hard all the way into the week. I'm not sure what day of the week they play on, guys. There's a lot of games in week 14 that are going to be on Friday. So we've got a bunch of Friday games, and then we've got some Saturday games, obviously, as well. So
that's a Saturday game there.
That's a Saturday one. Okay. Is it a late night? Probably a late night Saturday.
3:30.
Oh, well, you know what? They're not doing as many late night games Saturday night. It's a bunch of 3:30 games on Saturday, I saw. So that was pretty interesting. 12 o'clock and 3:30 is the main time slots this week on Saturday. And then, as I said, there'll be a lot of night games Friday night. So keep your eye out for that, guys. You don't want to all of a sudden look up on Saturday morning and you missed half of the rivalry games on Friday night. Don't do that to yourself. Yeah. I'll probably just go on and go to work Friday night and just watch football all night at work. That's so that way I can get some peace and quiet and just pay attention to all the games, right?
Going to work, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna go to work, right? I get stuff done while I'm watching football, but it's come on, man. I just need a little quiet time, a little time to myself. Yeah. Number 12, Clemson. We're going to see what Clemson's made of this weekend. Look, I'm not super impressed with Clemson's defense, y'all. Did you see how many rushing yards they gave up this weekend, Mason?
That's pretty bad.
Man, that's bad. And I think Clemson is in need of a defensive coordinator swap. I know that this guy is like a protege or whatever of Brent Venables and blah, blah, blah. I don't really care about that. That doesn't really make a hill of beans to me. One guy that hangs out with another guy doesn't mean he's that guy. You know what I'm saying? That's not how that works. It's like human transitive property or something. These are two different humans. They got different sets of judgment, and this ain't working out that great. And there's a lot of talent on that Clemson defense. I feel like, Peter Woods and just tons of dudes on that defensive line. Not nearly as good as what they should be, I feel like, this season. And South Carolina's offense has been tooting along pretty good here lately, man. So we'll see. We'll see. And I think South Carolina is going to give that offense for Clemson absolute fit. So we're going to break that game down on Tuesday as well, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Make sure you're here for the live show. That'll be like pretty much like a kind of like a special edition, I guess. It's like rivalry weekend special edition of the Tuesday show. So definitely not going to want to miss that one. That's going to be a lot of fun. And we got rivalry games we're going to talk about here after the top 25. So don't go anywhere, guys. And while y'all are all in here, help me out real quick. Hit that like button. It helps you boys out so much. It just helps get the word out and things like that with YouTube. Otherwise, the big YouTube just ignores little college football like us. So just help us out real quick. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Number 11, we've got Boise State. A little bit of a struggle bus this weekend, Mason, for Boise State. We talked about it last night. Now, Double O'Neill is in the comment section, so I can ask Double O'Neill right now. Was the weather really bad yesterday in Wyoming? Was it really? Because, I mean, I do know that it gets nasty there at this time of year. There's no doubt about it. I did not watch that game. I was watching other stuff. But judging by the passing yards, like Ashton Genty, we talked about it last night. He was pretty much the reason they won this game. And he hits another milestone, bunch of games in a row with 125-plus yards rushing. Altitude, cold, and windy is what Double O'Neill said. Wyoming is a hard place to play. Yeah, Wyoming is the weather gets nasty there this time of year. They love hosting home games there, but I mean, Wyoming has been really, really bad this year. That was obviously not a great win, but at this point, it doesn't really matter. It's just win, baby. Just win. It doesn't really matter. We talked about that last week. You just got to keep winning because Boise State, if they're undefeated, they win their conference. Does it matter that they beat Wyoming by 4 or whatever? It doesn't. Yeah. No, it doesn't. That's the answer to that. Mason, you got anything else to kind of round out this 11 through 25 here?
No, I think we're pretty good here. I'm really excited for Arizona State. This seems like a really fun program to watch. They're pretty exciting behind Kenny Dillingham. Excited to see what they do. It's looking like they're going to go to the Big 12 championship game. Probably win the Big 12. This is a team similar to South Carolina that's really come on here as of late. But they being in the Big 12, they have an opportunity to play for a conference championship, make it to the playoffs, get the bye. Whereas South Carolina is hoping that somebody messes up in front of them for them to get a chance to get in. So, but yeah, I mean, I like 11 through 25 here. I don't have a ton to add. I think we pretty much covered everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just reading through some of these comments here. How has South Carolina played against teams with Clemson's defense? Ole Miss. South Carolina lost to LSU, who just received the same number of votes as Georgia Tech. I don't know what that means. The same number of votes as Georgia Tech?
Like top 25 votes, I'm thinking.
Okay, well, neither one of them is a top 25 team, right? And that's why I don't really care about the votes because that's a bunch of people that don't watch football, obviously. South Carolina lost to Alabama, and Milroe threw like 2-3 picks. How has South Carolina played against teams with Clemson's defense? Okay, I was trying to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. Well, first of all, you're talking about Clemson's defense like it's been really, really dominant this year. I mean, they've given up 30 points several times throughout the season. Even NC State was able to muster up 30 points against Clemson. And I know some of that was in a little bit of garbage time, but Clemson's defense, while it does have some dudes on it, it's not been deep, right? Anytime that they've put any kind of backups in there, they have given up tons of yards and points. So I'm not so sure that, we're going to see. We are going to see. South Carolina is one hell of they're a handful this year, man. I'm telling you, that defensive line, I'd put it up against some of the best defensive lines in the country as far as comparison-wise. So, yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know.
I think if you're looking at South Carolina's schedule and you're trying to draw comparison as far as defense goes, I would I would say that that Clemson is similar to probably a Missouri, and South Carolina put up 34 on them. They're probably worse than Texas A&M, and South Carolina had scored 44 against the Aggies. So I don't. I just don't. I don't. I'm with you, Mark. I don't believe in this Clemson defense. I don't. I'm not saying that South Carolina. There's no way that they lose this game against Clemson, but I'm not seeing the defense of old that we're used to seeing with Clemson teams.
Yeah, and Ian, I also think that the South Carolina secondary is very underrated. DQ Smith back there on the back end is really good. The other dude that's got the weird last name that's hard to say, he's really good too. They got some dudes throughout that defensive unit, and it came back to a big surprise to me. I wasn't one that sat here and predicted it in the offseason or anything. I just try to, call it like I see it, and I think South Carolina's got an edge. They're more battle tested. They played a much more difficult schedule than Clemson has this season. And I think that's going to be a good game. I don't think it's going to necessarily be a blowout or anything. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think either team's blowing either one out. Can't wait to talk more about that game coming up on Tuesday. I keep having to look at my list and remember what games we're talking about for some reason. All right, let's keep it going, guys. Top 25, week 14, 6 through 10. Here we go. We got Penn State at number 6. I want to know what you guys think about Penn State. I tried to ask, there was a Penn State guy in here last night in the comment section. I tried to ask him what his thoughts were. And Mason, you know what? Doing a little research today, I figured something out about Penn State. And it was actually really, really interesting. And I wasn't actually researching Penn State. I was researching Michigan and Ohio State. Getting ready for this breakdown that we're going to have here in just a few minutes on the big game, right? But as I was looking through all the Big Ten conference rankings, did you realize that Penn State is at the top of the offensive Big Ten rankings for total yards and pretty much every conceivable category? Would you believe that Penn State has thrown the ball for about 100 less yards this year than Ohio State has? And they've rushed the ball for more yards or just about the same amount of yards? And total yards per game, Ohio State's third in the conference. Penn State is number 1. Yeah. How about that?
My understanding is with this offense is they drive the ball downfield and get field goals and they're not converting very much to touchdowns and all that. But the offense seems to be much more explosive than they were last year for sure.
Well, and that's my point. There is something there. There is smoke. There may not be a flame, but there is smoke. And that's more than what we could say last year. So I just, I want to know what you guys think about Penn State. Are they a player away? Do they deserve to be as high as we have them ranked? Or, should they be higher? It's an argument that can be had. All right. They haven't played the toughest schedule in the world. They're one really hard game this year. They didn't even score an offensive touchdown. So there's obviously problems with correlating yards to points for Penn State. So that's kind of a point of contention for me and something that really kind of hampers this team from being really good, in my opinion, versus being elite. Indiana at 7. Indiana lucked up, Mason. Indiana really lucked up this weekend in the fact that everybody else lost. So Indiana didn't have to fall too far, and they've got a really good shot. I think maybe just as good a shot as any that aren't conference champions, obviously, of getting into the college football playoff here. So really, really helped them out. I have to be honest, because that's what we're doing here. I'm not blowing smoke up anybody's ass. I'm not here to cater to any one fan base or person, including my own. But Indiana got dismantled yesterday. And we talked about it last week that it was the Jimmies and the Joes. And I actually came away from the game feeling a little bit better about Indiana's defense. Right. And that sounds kind of weird considering the amount of points that were given up, but it had to do with special teams more than anything. And Ohio State's offense is just good. They're not great. They're not elite. They're good. They're good. Their defense is freaking elite. So I don't feel like the Indiana offense is going to be able to hang against an elite defense. I think we've seen that now. Now we'll probably get a chance to see it again. As I said, they're probably going to go to the college football playoff. They'll have every chance in the world to prove me wrong, and I'm wrong all the time. But from what I saw from this offense, when they're matched up with the dudes of the dudes in the country, lined up on the other side on defense, I'm not so sure this offense is going to be able to move the ball up and down the field. 150 total yards in that game. That was absolutely putrid. Set up Ohio State, obviously, with some short fields. And so I think that caused a huge, huge discrepancy as far as the margin in this one. Indiana's just not as good as Ohio State right now. And now we know that. But how good are they? And how good is Ohio State? Because Ohio State might be the best team in the country. Now they've lost to Oregon, so Oregon reserves the right to hold that number one spot. We'll get there in a minute. Big Ten is interesting for every conference is interesting in a different way. It's pretty wild. Every conference has kind of got their own storylines going on. Pretty cool this year. Number 8, Tennessee. As I said, Tennessee had to root for Florida yesterday, and they rooted Florida all the way to a victory. How about that? The Volunteers rooting on the Gators. This is a weird, perverse world we live in, Mason. But Tennessee backed their way into the playoffs yesterday. Congratulations, Tennessee. You're going to the college football playoff more than likely. And I'd say it's way more than likely. So Tennessee is going to get to sit home, get a little healthier, practice, all that good stuff. Probably, obviously not going to play for an SEC championship. So they're just going to chill and get ready for the playoffs. And I think that is, something to be said for that, for sure. And it's been a good year for Tennessee, a different looking Tennessee than we've seen. They deserve to be at the number 8 spot. Number 9 and number 10, we got SMU, Miami. We're going to see these teams face off pretty soon, guys. SMU's got to go all the way across the country, which I guess for me, it would be across the country. I'm in Georgia. SMU's in Dallas. So they got to go out to California. That's not nearly as bad of a trip as it would be for somebody like me. But SMU is going to take care of business out there. I have very little doubt about that. And they're going to make their way to Charlotte. We'll have to see what the whole situation holds with, I guess, Clemson and Miami. Miami's just got to win this next game, and it's over for Clemson, right? Isn't that right, Mason? Or no, Clemson's got 2 losses, and one of them's out of conference, one of them's in conference. Miami's got 1 in conference. So if Clemson loses, then Miami wins that tiebreaker. And that's assuming that Miami wins this weekend coming up as well. I believe that's what's going on there. 6 through 10, what do you got? What do you think?
I like it. I mean, I don't have too much to really add to what you said. I thought Penn State looked really sloppy in the win against Minnesota. I thought for a while there Minnesota was going to come out and win that football game and just take Penn State down with the rest of the teams that lost that were in the college football playoff hunt. But they ended up squeaking it out, and once again, staying in the top 10, maybe top 5 in the AP. I'm not sure where they had them at, but it's interesting, what they've been able to do. And we said preseason that there's no way Penn State's not in the college football playoff because there were 11 guaranteed wins on their schedule. Like, that was obvious. So, but they don't have any really good wins. But they're gonna get in anyways, which is kind of weird. But we've got them at 6 just because they've got a 1 in their loss column right now, which is a lot better than most of these other teams can say. So by default, they're staying up there. Indiana only going down to 7, similar to Penn State, and I really wish we could see this football game. Penn State versus Indiana, and the winner of that should go to the playoffs, because I don't think that both of these teams who don't have any top 25 wins should be playing in the college football playoffs and should be hosting a playoff game. I think it's a little ridiculous, but they don't make their schedules. All they do is beat who they can. So it is what it is. Tennessee gets back into the hunt here. it was interesting seeing the Tennessee fans at the game cheering on the Gators, doing the Gator chomp and all that. That was pretty cool to see. And then, but yeah, then SMU and Miami at 9 and 10. I think both of these teams are probably going to be in, especially if. So I guess I didn't realize that Clemson right now is ahead of Miami in the standings for the ACC. So I guess if Clemson and SMU face off in the championship game, Miami should be in regardless, right?
Yeah. So if Miami wins this weekend, then and that's it, because they'll have the tiebreaker just because of the wins losses. So Miami wins, they're in. Miami loses, then Clemson's in. And that's assuming that Clemson beats South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
So Miami's in if they win.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So
that's how it should be. I mean, that in my mind, I feel like Miami's a better team. So, but
yeah, they'll have the tiebreaker because Miami's only got one loss. The tiebreaker goes to win-loss record after conference wins and losses. So, if one team's got one loss total and the other one's got two, and they both only have one conference loss, tiebreaker goes to the team with less total losses.
See, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. I feel like
it's like why would you do a tiebreaker for a conference championship that had something to do with non-conference games? Right?
Yeah.
Like the old Big Ten, I remember back in the day, they used to do like total yards in conference or something, total offensive yards or total points scored, or I think maybe it was point differential in conference. It was something like that.
Yeah.
That made sense. That makes a lot of
sense.
Point differential in conference makes the most sense to me. If you're going to do a tiebreaker for a conference championship game, that just seems only right. All right, let's keep it going. And everybody's talking about Clemson. If they beat South Carolina, they may get an at-large bid. Yeah, I think they will. Yeah, I definitely think they will. If they beat South Carolina, that's a good win for Clemson, and they're in. No doubt in my mind. All right, wrong direction. 1 through 5. And let's get to some breakdowns, shall we? Yes, we shall. Y'all hit that like button. Help me out real quick. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you guys. Peanut Butter Posse, Ian Rowland, Double O'Neill in the comment section. I appreciate all you guys coming and hanging out with us. Hope y'all are having a good evening. We got Oregon at number 1. I don't feel like there's really a whole lot that we need to say. I mean, Oregon's going to be hosting Washington this weekend. We'll see what Oregon looks like. There's been a game or two here and there that Oregon hasn't looked that great, but I mean, nobody's really been more consistent, though, honestly. In this 2024 season, everybody's had a bad game or two, and Oregon hasn't lost any of them. So there's something to be said for that, certainly. And not to mention, one of those bad games was way at the beginning of the season. This isn't even the same team at this point. So I think Oregon deserves to be number 1. Again, we've stated that every week since they beat Ohio State. They haven't moved, and they're not going to unless they lose to Ohio State. And in that case, they may just move to number 2 or something like that. So Oregon's in a great spot here. Dan Lanning has got Oregon right where they need to be. Ohio State, number 2. This Ohio State defense is something else, brother. It is something else. And they decided to actually blitz a little bit this weekend, get some sacks, get some pressure on the quarterback. Man, they just ate that in Indiana offensive line up. And I don't think that's anything that's not putting Indiana down. I think Ohio State would do that to, at least 120 teams in the country. So I don't think that's, necessarily, an indictment of Indiana and where they're at. But man, this Ohio State defense is good. I give the Ohio State offense right now, I give them a B. I think they're a B. But they play such good special teams and defense that they put their offense in really positive situations for the most part. And they got Chip Kelly. They got a head coach as their offensive coordinator. He's super efficient. Will Howard is like the poster boy for efficient offenses, right? He just runs the game plan. He doesn't do too much. Ohio State's in a good spot. This is a really good season to have a B-rated offense and an A to A+ defense. Like, you can win a national championship like that this year for sure, because there's no offense that you just can't keep up with, right? So I think Ohio State's in great position. Texas is shaky, man. Look, y'all know how I feel about Texas. Ever since, they put a bad taste in my mouth this year. I'm not going to lie to you. Not my favorite team. I don't like all the glitz and the glam and the celebrity stuff, the celebrity and the $5,000 suits and the aviator. I don't give a shit about all that stuff. Okay. That's not my style and I don't like it. And I've told you guys that and I've been pretty clear about that. But all that stuff to the side, Texas is missing something. There's something missing with this team. They don't have killer instinct, or I know the offense isn't as good as what it was last year. I know that it's not. I see it with my own eyes. I just watched Xavier Worthy on TV in here in the NFL. That guy being gone is a big deal, right? The other wide receiver that transferred from Georgia, he who I shall not name, AD. He was really good. This offense isn't as good this year. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Or maybe they were just playing a Big 12 schedule last year and the defenses were easier. But however you want to square it up, Texas doesn't even have any wins against top 25 opponents at this point. So I think we have every right to question Texas and their path to the college football playoff and the SEC championship this year. They don't have any control over making their own schedule their first year in the SEC, but man, it couldn't have worked out much better for them. And it was one of the easiest schedules we saw by far, no doubt. And then you look at Georgia, on the other hand, has been the complete opposite. Georgia really just has had two kind of cupcake games all year, one towards the beginning, one this past weekend. The rest of them had just been absolute slobber knocker games. And Kentucky should have been an easy game, but wasn't early in the season, right? Georgia's had a tough road to hoe, and it's been a workmanlike season for Georgia to get to 11 wins so far this season. I think the Georgia offense, I think it started to figure a few things out, though, Mason. I really do. I feel like this offense had to kind of hit rock bottom there at Ole Miss, and it seems like they're playing with a lot more free spirit. Like, a lot of weight has been lifted off of them. Looks like they're having fun. This is the first time. I talked about it early in the season. Georgia players didn't look like they were having a lot of fun playing offense, in my opinion. Looked like they played tight, like all the expectations in the world are on them. They get a couple of losses, and it was like the chains were kind of off. It's like, what do we have to lose at this point? And now I'm seeing Carson Beck with a little bit different body language, and I don't know. We'll see what it translates to. I'm very close to this team, and I keep a pulse on this team all year long. I think I'm starting to see something on the offense, and the defense is going to show up for the big games. I think we just know that at this point. Notre Dame at number 5. Notre Dame is my eyes. I see them, and I'm like, wow, Notre Dame is pretty daggum good. And then my eyes go look at their schedule, and I'm like, I'm beating up on armed forces schools, and Louisville's like one of your best wins. Texas A&M was a good win, but it was the very first game for Mike Elko and that new Texas A&M regime, and it was unreasonable to expect third-year coach and system at Notre Dame. It was not reasonable to think that Texas A&M was going to be able to beat them in the first place, and it wasn't like it was they killed them or something. It was a pretty close game. So, if those two teams played now, would it be even closer, or maybe Texas A&M wins? Yeah, I think it's possible. So Notre Dame is a hard team to gauge, man, again, because of their schedule and not playing in a conference. They're going to have their hands probably a little bit more full this weekend than what some people would think. We're going to talk about that game here in just a bit. What do you think about the top 5, Mason? I'm keep running my big fat mouth, but I'm excited about this getting close here in week 14. There's still just a ton of intrigue and a lot to figure out going into the end of the season. I've really never seen anything like this in college football.
Yeah, well, and looking at Oregon at number one, it's kind of odd, but this team is probably like the least talked about number one team ever. It's a little bit interesting to me, but they're in a class above their own when it comes to what they've done with their schedule. I think. Look, Oregon is flawed. They can get beat by any of the teams on this page, probably. But what they've done to their schedule, I think is what kind of sets them above every other team in the country. Ohio State, they've got Michigan this week. It was I guess a big win for them over Indiana. I think that it was a dominant performance, but I don't really see anything changing with the Buckeyes this year. They'll have another crack at Oregon on a neutral site, and who knows how that game's going to go. I mean, that was one of the best games of the year, honestly, as far as being competitive and having two powerhouse programs throwing haymakers. I mean, that was really fun to watch, and I'll be excited for the rematch there. Texas at 3. They're kind of that SEC team that's similar to Penn State, where they haven't played anybody. Their best win right now is probably Vanderbilt. It might have been Kentucky this past week just because of the margin of victory. But nonetheless, we don't really know what Texas is. We saw Georgia go to Austin and just absolutely take care of business and handle them on the road. That was kind of a one-off, though. I don't think that game would play out that way every single time it was played. I think that was a little bit of a perfect storm and a Texas program that was caught on their heels early in that game. But my point is, I don't know what Texas is. So this week against Texas A&M, I think we'll get a little bit of a better gauge. But I mean, Texas A&M has been up and down all year as well. So excited to break that game down with you, Mark, on Tuesday. But that game is going to be played at Kyle Field. So very real opportunity, as we've seen teams on the road in the SEC have been falling and dropping like flies. It's been kind of crazy and chaotic, I would say. Georgia at number 4. I think it's interesting that Georgia creeps all the way back to number 4 after, earlier in the year, we're thinking, man, they may not even make the playoffs. And now it's looking like they're really in a great position to win the SEC and have a bye in the first round. Just kind of crazy how this season has unfolded. I did not like to see the defense get gashed in the first half of that football game against UMass. UMass rushed for over 160 yards in that first half, and that was just pitiful. I mean, just a pitiful performance by the defense. But you kind of took the words out of my mouth there. Georgia's defense does not play the same type of scheme and system in games where they know that they can keep it vanilla because they have the dudes to do that with. I guess they're just that much better than their opponent, so they don't play with a ton of scheme and they just don't put a lot on film on the defensive side of the football or offense. And I think that was kind of the case, and I mean, they got away with it. It didn't really hurt them at the end of the day, but either way, no matter how vanilla you're going to be, you shouldn't be giving up. You should be on pace for giving up 300 yards on the ground by halftime. That is unacceptable for sure, but it should give the defense a lot to work on this week as they have a short week to get ready for the Yellow Jackets on Friday. Notre Dame at 5. I really like Notre Dame. I think that this is one of the best defenses in the country. I think that they're figuring some things out on offense, or have really since the NIU loss. It seems like the offense has really geared itself, kind of towards Riley Leonard and his skill set a lot more than they were early in the year, where it seemed like they were trying to force some things and force him into their offensive system and not building the scheme around Riley Leonard. Now it seems like they're back on track with that offense and the run game's getting going. But another team that doesn't have a very tough schedule. So we don't really know when you're not facing an Army or a Navy and the lights are on, how are you going to perform? I know they have the Texas A&M win, which is a good win at Kyle Field, but that was ages ago in the college football world. So what do they look like now? We're not really going to see it outside of this USC game, which they do have to go to USC this year. So could be interesting, but we'll break that one down here in a minute. I have no qualms with your top 25, Mark. I thought it was pretty spot on.